The morning sun cast long shadows across Silicon Valley as tech billionaire Elon Musk stood before his bathroom mirror, studying his reflection. His fingers traced the edges of his distinctive features, knowing they needed to disappear for what he was about to do. He had grown tired of the endless meetings, the corporate facade, and the disconnect from the real world. Today would be different. With careful precision, he applied subtle makeup to alter his appearance, donned weathered clothes he'd purchased from a thrift store, and messed up his usually well-kept hair. The transformation was striking. Where once stood one of the world's wealthiest men, now appeared someone society might barely notice. The bustling café sat in the heart of downtown San Francisco, its windows steamy from the morning rush of coffee orders. The establishment, known as the Daily Grind, was popular among both tech workers and the city's homeless population, making it the perfect location for Musk's social experiment. As he shuffled through the door in his ragged clothes, the warmth of coffee and freshly baked pastries enveloped him. The café buzzed with the usual morning crowd, young professionals in crisp attire tapping away at their laptops, elderly regulars solving crossword puzzles, and baristas calling out complex coffee orders. A young barista glanced up as he approached the counter, her expression shifting almost imperceptibly. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone careful and measured. Musk mumbled about wanting a coffee but having no money, his voice disguised with a slight tremor. The interaction that followed would become the first of many eye-opening moments. To his surprise, the barista's face softened. "Just wait here a moment," she said, before turning to prepare something. Meanwhile, a tech worker in an expensive suit, ironically wearing a Tesla logo, brushed past him with barely concealed disdain. The irony wasn't lost on Musk, his own company's merchandise being worn by someone who couldn't see past appearances. The barista returned with not just a coffee, but also a warm breakfast sandwich. "It's on me today," she said quietly, offering a genuine smile. "Everyone deserves a warm drink and something to eat in the morning." Musk noticed her name tag read Jean, and he would remember this act of kindness long after this experiment ended. As he settled into a corner table, more stories began to unfold around him. An elderly man reading a newspaper noticed him and shared half of his muffin without a word. A group of college students invited him to share their table when the café got crowded, treating him no differently than they would anyone else. However, not all interactions were positive. A business meeting taking place nearby quickly relocated when he sat close to them. A woman clutched her purse tighter as she walked past. These small gestures, these subtle signs of discrimination, hit differently when experienced firsthand. The morning crowd thinned as lunch approached, and Musk observed the changing dynamics of the café. The staff treated everyone with varying degrees of attention. Some customers received elaborate service with broad smiles, while others, particularly those who appeared less fortunate, often faced longer waits and shorter interactions. Jean, the kind barista, continued her shift with unwavering compassion. She treated every customer with the same respect, regardless of their appearance or status. During her break, she even sat briefly with an elderly homeless man, engaging in conversation while sharing her lunch. As the hours passed, Musk found himself deeply moved by the complex social dynamics playing out in this simple café setting. He witnessed both the casual cruelty of indifference and the profound impact of simple kindnesses. Every interaction, every averted gaze, every unexpected smile told a story about humanity's capacity for both prejudice and compassion. The experiment was revealing more than just how people treated the homeless. It was exposing the invisible social barriers that existed in everyday spaces. Here, in this microcosm of society, the true character of people emerged in their unguarded moments, in their instinctive reactions to those they perceived as different or less fortunate. The afternoon sun began to cast different shadows through the café windows, and Musk realized he had spent nearly 6 hours observing and experiencing life from a completely different perspective. The lessons learned would prove invaluable, not just for him personally, but for how he would approach his company's humanitarian initiatives in the future. As the afternoon crowd began filtering into the daily grind, Musk witnessed a subtle shift in the café's atmosphere. The laptop-wielding professionals were replaced by high school students and tired office workers seeking their afternoon caffeine fix. His corner table had become a unique vantage point for observing humanity's ebb and flow. A particularly touching moment unfolded when a young boy, no more than 10 years old, approached him with his mother trailing anxiously behind. The boy held out a chocolate chip cookie wrapped in a napkin. "I saved this from my lunch," he said, his eyes bright with genuine concern. "Nobody should be hungry." His mother, initially hesitant, smiled proudly at her son's gesture. The interaction caught the attention of a local food truck owner who regularly parked outside the café. The owner, a middle-aged man with laugh lines around his eyes, had been watching the scene unfold through the window. He entered the café and approached Musk's table, introducing himself simply as Pops. "I see you've been here a while," Pops said, pulling up a chair. "I've got some extra food that'll just go to waste otherwise. Would you help me out by taking it?" His eyes twinkled with understanding, preserving Musk's dignity while offering assistance. The tech billionaire was struck by how this small business owner, who likely struggled with his own expenses, showed such generosity. Meanwhile, Jin's shift was ending, and her replacement, a younger barista, took over. The difference in treatment became immediately apparent. The new server's impatience with homeless customers created a tense atmosphere, highlighting how much impact a single person's attitude could have on an entire establishment's environment. A group of tech entrepreneurs entered, loudly discussing their latest startup ideas. Musk couldn't help but smile at the irony as they debated the future of Tesla and SpaceX, completely unaware of his presence. Their conversation turned to solutions for homelessness, with suggestions that showed how disconnected they were from the reality he was currently experiencing. "They should just learn to code," one of them said dismissively, drawing knowing nods from his companions. "There are plenty of opportunities out there." Musk made a mental note to address this oversimplified perspective at his next board meeting. The afternoon wore on, and Musk observed an elderly couple who ran a small bookstore across the street. They had been watching him through their shop window and finally came over during their break. Without any fuss, they brought him a cup of hot tea and shared stories about their 40 years in the neighborhood, speaking to him with the same respect they'd show any customer. Their stories painted a picture of how the area had changed, from a close-knit community where everyone knew each other to a rapidly gentrifying neighborhood where old connections were breaking down. Yet, they maintained their belief in human kindness, exemplified by their daily habit of offering free books to anyone who couldn't afford them. As evening approached, an unexpected incident occurred. A young woman rushed into the café, clearly distressed. She'd lost her wallet and needed to make an urgent phone call. The new barista refused to help, citing store policy. Musk watched as various customers ignored her plight, too absorbed in their phones or laptops to notice. Drawing upon his morning's experiences of kindness, Musk decided to act. Still in his homeless disguise, he approached the woman and offered her his newly acquired phone card, a gift from Pops. The surprise on everyone's faces when a supposedly homeless man became the only one to help was palpable. This act sparked a chain reaction of kindness. Another customer, moved by the scene, offered to help the woman contact her family. The originally reluctant barista, perhaps feeling ashamed, provided a free coffee. It showed how compassion could be contagious, breaking down the artificial barriers people built around themselves. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows through the café windows once again. Musk had spent nearly 10 hours experiencing life from a completely different perspective. He'd seen how a simple café could become a microcosm of society's attitudes toward its most vulnerable members. He watched as the evening cleaning crew arrived, noticing how they treated him with a quiet respect that some wealthy customers hadn't shown. One cleaner shared that he'd been homeless himself 5 years ago, before finding this job. "Sometimes all people need is a chance," he said softly, wiping down a nearby table. and someone who believes in them. As evening settled over the city, the daily grind transformed once again. The warm lighting created a cozy atmosphere, and the dinner crowd began trickling in. Musk noticed a subtle shift in the café's energy, the rushed pace of daytime giving way to more leisurely conversations and lingering guests. A local choir group had just finished their practice at a nearby church and filled several tables. Their presence brought an unexpected warmth to the space as they shared leftover cookies from their rehearsal with everyone in the café, not distinguishing between the well-dressed and the seemingly homeless. One choir member, a retired teacher in her 60s, sat down at Musk's table without hesitation. She introduced herself as Mrs. Chen and began sharing stories about her years teaching in underprivileged neighborhoods. Every student had potential, she said, her eyes twinkling. They just needed someone to see it. The conversation was interrupted by a commotion at the counter. A well-dressed businessman was berating the evening barista over a minor mistake in his order. The same people who had ignored the distressed woman earlier were now watching intently, yet again doing nothing to help. To everyone's surprise, Pops, who had returned to check on Musk, stepped in. With calm dignity, he diffused the situation by offering to buy the angry customer a new drink. Sometimes, he said loud enough for everyone to hear, we forget that kindness costs less than anger. The businessman, caught off guard by this intervention from someone he'd barely noticed before, fell silent. Looking around at the watching faces, he seemed to suddenly realize how his behavior appeared to others. Red-faced, he apologized to the barista and insisted on paying for drinks for the next 3 customers in line. As the evening progressed, Musk observed a group of young tech workers entering the café. They were celebrating a successful app launch, their excitement palpable. One of them was wearing a SpaceX hoodie, and their conversation inevitably turned to discussions about innovation and technology. Imagine if we could solve homelessness with an app, one suggested, while another quickly pulled out their laptop to start coding. Musk listened intently as they brainstormed solutions, noting how they had good intentions but little understanding of the real challenges faced by those living on the streets. A delivery driver who had been making regular stops at the café throughout the day finally took his break. He sat near Musk, sharing half of his sandwich without a word. Later, he explained that he'd been homeless himself for a brief period after losing his job during the economic downturn. The hardest part wasn't the hunger, he said quietly. It was feeling invisible. The evening wore on, and the café began preparing to close. The cleaning crew started their final rounds, but instead of asking Musk to leave, they worked around him with respect. The night manager, who had just started her shift, brought him a fresh cup of coffee in a bag containing unsold pastries that would otherwise be thrown away. A group of college students who had been studying in the corner all evening were packing up their laptops. One of them approached Musk's table, explaining that they were working on a project about urban poverty. Instead of just asking questions, they sat down and genuinely listened to his perspective, taking notes with increasing interest as he shared insights from his day of observation. The night manager, overhearing the conversation, joined in during her break. She shared her own experiences of working with homeless customers, explaining how the café had become an unofficial sanctuary for many. We can't solve everyone's problems, she said, but we can treat everyone with dignity. As midnight approached, Musk watched a young couple discreetly leaving cash and a note on several tables. The note read, "For tomorrow's coffee, pay it forward when you can." This simple act of kindness, done without expectation of recognition, demonstrated how compassion could ripple through a community. The café's lights dimmed, signaling closing time. The remaining customers gathered their belongings, some nodding acknowledgement to Musk as they left. In just one day, he had witnessed countless small acts of kindness alongside moments of indifference and prejudice, each telling its own story about human nature. As midnight approached, the café staff began their closing routine, but the night manager made a compassionate decision. Noticing the dropping temperature outside, she invited Musk to stay a bit longer while they cleaned. "The weather's getting rough out there," she said, her voice gentle. "Take your time." During these quiet hours, Musk observed the behind-the-scenes life of the café. The night baker arrived to begin preparing for the next day, filling the space with the comforting aroma of fresh dough. The baker, a quiet man with flour-dusted hands, shared stories of his own struggles while offering Musk a warm roll straight from the oven. "I came to this country with nothing but dreams," the baker said, kneading dough as he spoke. "Someone gave me a chance when I needed it most. Now, I try to do the same for others." He explained how he regularly hired people trying to get back on their feet, believing that everyone deserved an opportunity to rebuild their lives. Around 1 a.m., a group of emergency workers, nurses and paramedics from the nearby hospital, stopped by for their regular coffee run. The café kept special hours for these night shift workers, understanding their vital role in the community. One nurse recognized Musk from earlier in the day and discreetly slipped him a card for a free health clinic. "We see too many people avoiding medical care because they're afraid of the costs," she explained, her eyes showing the weariness of a long shift. "Everyone deserves access to healthcare, no questions asked." Her simple act of caring demonstrated how some people carried their professional compassion into every aspect of their lives. The night shift brought its own cast of characters. A taxi driver on his break shared stories of the city's changing face, while a security guard from a nearby building brought in extra sandwiches from his dinner. These night workers formed their own small community, looking out for each other and anyone else who needed help. Around 2 a.m., a young entrepreneur who had been working late at a nearby startup hub entered the café. Unlike the earlier tech workers, she saw past appearances. She sat near Musk and struck up a conversation about the neighborhood, sharing her concerns about how gentrification was affecting the local community. "We're trying to create a program that helps local businesses hire people transitioning out of homelessness," she explained, showing genuine interest in addressing real problems rather than just throwing technology at them. "But first, we need to understand the actual challenges people face." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a group of teenagers who had clearly been out too late. The night manager handled them with remarkable patience, ensuring they had safe rides home. One of the teens, noticing Musk, insisted on leaving money for his breakfast the next morning. As the night deepened, Musk witnessed a side of the city few billionaires ever saw. A street artist took shelter from the cold, sharing his sketchbook filled with powerful drawings of city life. A food delivery worker traded stories with the night baker, their conversation a mix of different languages but united by shared experiences of starting over in a new country. The night manager, during a quiet moment, shared how the café had become an unofficial safe haven. "We keep a list of shelters, job opportunities, and resources," she explained, showing a carefully maintained notebook. "Sometimes people just need to know where to start." Around 3 a.m., the first signs of the next day began to appear. Early morning delivery trucks rumbled past, and the street cleaners began their rounds. The night baker's creations filled the display cases, transforming the café once again. Each pastry, he explained, was made with the understanding that food was more than sustenance, it was dignity and comfort. The pre-dawn hours brought a unique peace to the café. The night shift workers had created their own community, different from but no less vibrant than the daytime crowd. They shared an unspoken understanding, a recognition that everyone deserved respect regardless of their circumstances. As the first hints of dawn began to color the sky, the daily grind entered its most transformative hours. The night shift was winding down, and the early morning crew started arriving. Musk, still in his disguise, had now spent nearly 18 hours observing life from a perspective that most billionaires would never understand. A newspaper delivery person entered, bringing in the morning editions. The headlines ironically included a story about one of Musk's companies, causing him to smile beneath his disguise. The delivery person, noticing him, shared a paper without hesitation. "Everyone should know what's happening in the world," she said with a kind smile, unaware of who she was really talking to. Around 4 a.m., the first wave of construction workers began filtering in, their fluorescent vests creating splashes of color in the dim cafe. One worker, his hands calloused from years of labor, bought an extra coffee and breakfast sandwich, placing them quietly on Musk's table. "Been there myself," he said simply. "Things can change." The construction worker, who introduced himself as Ray, shared his story of rebuilding his life after losing everything in the 2008 financial crisis. "The hardest part wasn't starting over," he explained, stirring his coffee. "It was realizing that the system isn't designed to help you get back up." The cafe's morning preparations were in full swing now. The night baker's apprentice, a young woman who had recently graduated from a rehabilitation program, was arranging the fresh pastries. She hummed softly while working, occasionally glancing at Musk with understanding in her eyes. "This place gave me my second chance," she shared during a brief break. "They didn't just offer me a job, they offered me dignity." Her words struck a chord with Musk, who was beginning to see how simple opportunities could transform lives. As 5 a.m. approached, a group of early morning joggers stopped by. Among them was a local business owner who regularly bought extra coffee for anyone who couldn't afford it. "My father was homeless for a while when I was young," she explained to her running companions. "He always said the hardest part was feeling worthless in other people's eyes." The pre-dawn hours brought in hospital staff changing shifts. A tired-looking doctor sat near Musk, sharing half of his breakfast without fanfare. They sat in comfortable silence, two people sharing a moment of humanity before the chaos of the day began. By 5:30 a.m., the cafe was filling with more early morning regulars. A group of sanitation workers arrived, their bright uniforms adding to the growing energy of the space. One of them recognized Musk from the previous evening and asked if he'd found a shelter for the night. The genuine concern in his voice was touching. A tech company shuttle stopped outside, and young professionals began streaming in, creating a stark contrast between different worlds. Some rushed past without a glance, while others showed small kindnesses, a paid-forward coffee, a shared muffin, a simple acknowledgement of another human's existence. The morning light was growing stronger now, and Musk could see his reflection in the window. His disguise had held up through the night, but more importantly, his understanding of the world had fundamentally shifted. He'd witnessed countless acts of kindness from people who had little to give, and indifference from those who had plenty. Around 6 a.m., Jean, the kind barista from the previous day, returned for her morning shift. She immediately recognized Musk from the day before and greeted him with the same warmth she'd shown 24 hours ago. "You made it through the night," she said, bringing him a fresh coffee. "Sometimes that's all we can do, make it through one more night." The cafe was now buzzing with morning energy, the space transformed once again by the rhythm of city life. Early morning sunlight streamed through the windows, creating long shadows that danced across the floor. Musk realized he had witnessed a complete cycle of humanity in this simple cafe. As the morning rush hour peaked, the daily grind was filled with the familiar chaos of coffee orders and hurried conversations. Musk, still maintaining his disguise after nearly 24 hours, noticed how different the same space felt compared to the previous morning. He was no longer just an observer, he had become part of the cafe's story. Jean, now fully into her morning shift, continued her pattern of quiet kindness. She had created a small system, Musk noticed, of using different colored cups to signal to her coworkers which customers might need extra attention or a free refill. It was a subtle code of compassion that most customers never noticed. Around 7 a.m., a local news crew set up outside the cafe for a street report about the city's growing tech industry. The irony wasn't lost on Musk as the reporter talked about Tesla's latest innovations while he sat unrecognized inside, wearing worn-out clothes and a day's worth of carefully crafted disguise. A group of business students entered, laptops in hand, discussing a case study about corporate social responsibility. They chose a table near Musk, their conversation floating over to him as they debated how companies could better serve their communities. But what do these CEOs really know about regular people's lives? One student asked, causing Musk to hide a knowing smile. The morning continued to unfold with its parade of humanity. The kind construction worker, Ray, returned from his shift to grab another coffee. This time, he brought news about a job opening at his site. "They're not asking too many questions about background," he mentioned loud enough for Musk to hear. "Just looking for people willing to work hard." A city council member stopped by for her morning coffee, and Musk observed how differently the staff treated her compared to himself. Yet, to his surprise, she noticed him and others like him in the café. She spent time talking with the manager about creating a program to help local businesses hire people transitioning out of homelessness. Around 8 a.m., a tech executive from a well-known company walked in, talking loudly on his phone about a new homeless shelter his company was planning to fund. The executive barely looked at the actual homeless people in the café, demonstrating the disconnect between corporate philanthropy and real understanding of the issues. Pops returned with his food truck, setting up for another day. He had noticed Musk still in the café and brought over a fresh breakfast sandwich. "You remind me of someone," Pop said thoughtfully, studying Musk's disguise. "Can't quite place it though." The moment was tense, but Pop simply shrugged and went back to his truck. By mid-morning, the café had settled into its rhythm again. The night manager stopped by for a coffee before heading home, and Musk watched her quiet interaction with Jean, a wordless handover of information about who needed help, who was struggling, who had made progress. Their subtle communication showed how much they cared about their community. A group of social workers held their weekly meeting at a nearby table, discussing various cases and resources. Their conversation was full of genuine concern and frustration at the system's limitations. Musk listened intently, making mental notes about how his companies could potentially help address some of these gaps. As the morning wore on, more familiar faces from the previous day appeared. The elderly couple from the bookstore brought new books to share. The choir members returned for their morning coffee, their kindness unchanged. The young entrepreneur stopped by again, this time with initial plans for her community hiring program. Around 11 a.m., a journalist sat down to work on a story about wealth inequality in the tech industry. She was writing about billionaires' responsibilities to their communities, unaware that one of her subjects was sitting just a few tables away, experiencing firsthand the reality of social inequality. The hours had begun to blur together, but Musk remained focused, absorbing every interaction, every conversation, every moment of kindness or indifference. He knew that soon he would need to reveal himself, but for now, he continued to learn from this unique perspective that few in his position would ever experience. As the afternoon approached, Musk knew his social experiment was drawing to a close. The weight of his experience over the past 24 hours had profoundly affected him, and he began preparing himself for what would come next. The café had shown him a world that boardroom discussions and corporate reports could never capture. Around noon, Jean was preparing to end her shift when she noticed Musk fidgeting with his disguise. She approached his table with concern in her eyes. "You seem different today," she said softly. "Sometimes talking helps." Her genuine care had been consistent throughout his time there, never wavering whether she was serving a CEO or someone who appeared homeless. The lunch crowd began filtering in, and Musk observed how the dynamics of the café shifted once again. A corporate team arrived for a meeting about their company's charitable initiatives. Their PowerPoint presentation, visible from Musk's corner, showed graphs and statistics about homelessness, reducing human struggles to numbers on a slide. Pops returned from his food truck rounds and sat with Musk again. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I've been watching you. You observe everything, take mental notes. You're not what you appear to be." The food truck owner's eyes twinkled with understanding, but he asked no questions, respecting whatever reasons Musk might have for his disguise. A local photographer had been capturing scenes of city life throughout the day. She asked Musk if she could take his photo for a project about hidden stories in the community. "There's something about your eyes," she explained. "They tell a story of someone who sees both sides of life." Musk agreed, knowing this image would take on new meaning very soon. By early afternoon, the cafe had become crowded with a mix of regular customers and newcomers. The kind construction worker, Ray, returned from his shift and joined Musk's table. "I've been thinking about what you said about second chances," he shared. "Maybe we could start a program here at the cafe, helping people get back on their feet." The elderly couple from the bookstore made their usual afternoon appearance, this time bringing a book about innovation and social change. "Something told us you might appreciate this," they said, placing it on his table. The title was ironically one of Musk's own recommendations from a recent interview. As the hours passed, Musk noticed how his perspective had shifted. He no longer saw customers as simply rich or poor, privileged or underprivileged. Instead, he saw complex stories, people carrying their own struggles, dreams, and capacity for kindness or indifference. A tech magazine journalist sat nearby, typing an article about Silicon Valley's impact on local communities. Musk overheard her questioning whether tech leaders truly understood the real-world implications of their decisions. The moment felt like a sign that it was time to bridge the gap between these two worlds he had been straddling. Jean returned for one last coffee refill before ending her shift. "Whatever brought you here," she said quietly, "I hope you found what you were looking for." Her words carried the weight of understanding that everyone's story was more complex than it appeared on the surface. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the cafe windows, similar to when Musk had first entered the day before. But now, these shadows seemed to represent the line between perception and reality, between appearance and truth. He knew it was almost time to reveal himself and transform these experiences into meaningful action. As he prepared himself for what would come next, Musk reflected on every conversation, every act of kindness, and every moment of ignorance he had witnessed. The cafe had become more than just a setting for his social experiment, it had become a mirror reflecting the true state of society's soul. As the afternoon light began to fade, marking the completion of his 24-hour journey, Musk knew it was time. He quietly stepped into the cafe's restroom and began removing his carefully crafted disguise. The face that emerged in the mirror was transformed not just physically, but by the weight of everything he had witnessed. When he returned to the main area, the cafe was experiencing its usual afternoon lull. Jean was just about to leave after her shift, Pops was cleaning up his food truck outside, and the regular customers were settled into their routines. The atmosphere was perfect for what he was about to do. He walked to the counter first, where the new shift manager was organizing receipts. "I'd like to pay for every free coffee, every shared meal, and every act of kindness that happened in the past 24 hours, he said in his natural voice. The manager looked up, confusion turning to shock as recognition dawned on her face. The cafe fell silent as people began to realize who had been sitting among them. Jean, who was collecting her belongings, stopped mid-motion. The kind construction worker, Ray, who had just returned for his afternoon coffee, stood frozen by the door. The elderly couple from the bookstore, who were arranging their lending shelf, turned with wide eyes. "My name is Elon Musk," he announced to the stunned cafe, "and for the past 24 hours, I've been learning what real innovation and human kindness look like." His voice carried clearly through the silent space. "I've seen more humanity in this cafe than in 100 board meetings." He turned to Jean first. "You showed me that consistency in kindness matters more than grand gestures." She blushed but stood tall, understanding now why she had sensed something different about him. "Your color-coded cup system for helping people in need? That's the kind of innovation that truly changes lives." To Pops, who had just walked in from his food truck, he said, "You saw through me but respected my journey. Your food truck isn't just a business, it's a mission." Pops nodded, a knowing smile on his weathered face. He addressed Ray next. "That construction job you mentioned? I want to expand it. Let's create a program that gives people real second chances. Ray's eyes welled up with tears as he understood the magnitude of what was happening. The cafe buzzed with excitement as Musk continued, starting today, the daily grind will be part of a new initiative. We're creating a foundation that will support small businesses that help their communities. Every act of kindness I witnessed here will be multiplied 1,000-fold. He turned to the elderly couple, your book sharing program? We're going to help you expand it citywide. Then to the young entrepreneur who had shared her community hiring program ideas, your startup just got its first major investor. The news crew that had reported on Tesla that morning had returned for an afternoon update. They stood speechless, cameras rolling, capturing the moment as it unfolded. The journalist writing about wealth inequality frantically took notes, her article taking an unexpected turn. But most importantly, Musk continued, I learned that true innovation isn't just about technology or profit. It's about seeing the humanity in each person, regardless of their circumstances. Every person who shared their food, their stories, their kindness, you are the real innovators. He announced his plans to create a network of cafes like the Daily Grind across the country, each serving as a community hub where kindness and opportunity could flourish. These spaces will be more than just cafes, they'll be bridges between different worlds, just as this place has been. As the sun set outside, casting the same long shadows that had greeted him 24 hours earlier, Musk looked around at the faces that had become familiar to him. Each person had contributed to his understanding, each interaction had shaped his perspective. Sometimes, he concluded, the most important innovations don't come from laboratories or boardrooms. They come from simple acts of kindness, from seeing each other's humanity, from believing that everyone deserves a chance. That's the lesson of the daily grind, and that's the future we're going to build together. The cafe erupted in applause and tears, hugs and handshakes. As the evening settled in, the daily grind had transformed from a simple cafe into a symbol of hope and change, proving that sometimes the greatest discoveries come from simply taking the time to walk in another person's shoes. The end.